Well, let's talk about all this. Our guests are the Europe Minister, David Lidington, the UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, Shadow Europe Minister, Emma Reynolds, and Ming Campbell from the Liberal Democrats. First of all, we're going to be speaking to David Lidington, and then I'm going to be turning to my other guest. David Lidington, first of all, David Cameron is going to say it's successful whatever happens, isn't it?
Well, what he's going into, the very start of a negotiation, is a confident approach. He spelled out today a vision not just for the Conservative Party or for Britain, but of the challenges that Europe as a whole needs to face up to: competitiveness, democratic accountability, and the principles that should govern how Europe as a whole addresses those.
It's a completely, and in many ways he used very emotive language. Some of it in the peroration was actually very Europhile and so forth. But, you know, you can set out a vision and you can set out a dream, but actually unpicking a lot of these treaty negotiations, unpicking a lot of the different elements are quite a different thing. But that is not just about Britain, is it?
But no, it's not just about Britain. But what your question, I think, omits is the fact that Europe is already undergoing a process of change that's driven in large part by the pressure on those of our friends who are in the single currency to integrate much more closely. So how do you make that fair to those who are out as well as those who are in? It's driven by the need to respond to the challenge of Asia and Latin America. If Europe doesn't raise its game in competitiveness, then every European country is going to be struggling in the future.
But when are we actually going to know? I mean, let's just set out the timescale here. There's some contradiction here, because what he was saying in his speech is, you know, there's going to be the next 3 years in reshaping what you actually want from Europe, and that's, of course, without your coalition partners here taking part in any of this. You're going to spend the next 3 years reshaping it, and then you're going to go to the country with a mandate for renegotiation.
Kirsty, look, first of all, there's not going to be
meat on the bone.
There's not going to be 3 years of standing still, although Ming Campbell and I don't agree 100% about European matters. We've got a coalition agreement where week by week we are delivering on the process of European reform that does not require treaty change, that is underway on things like banking union, on fisheries. We will make clear as a Conservative Party, certainly before people come to vote at the next general election, what it is that we'll be putting to the people at that general election as the position that a Conservative government, if elected with a majority, will take into the treaty negotiations, which I would be expected to take place early in the next Parliament.
But you then have the situation where you're doing this big review of competences, as it's called, which runs, as it were, like a semester by semester, going through the whole gamut of European involvement in British affairs, put it a different way. You've got that coming up as a report card. Is that going to be the basis on which you're going to call for change? It'll
be a very important source of evidence to inform the development of policy in detail. For example, I will want to look at what business and business organisations say in their evidence. And these are the things we like, we really want to keep in the European negotiation. These are things that we want to change.
But let's be clear, the next 3 years, you're going to go to European summits as a coalition.
Yes.
And are you going to be ripping apart every little thing, knowing the Liberal Democrats are sitting there? What on earth is going on?
I've just said, while we are a coalition, we work in accordance with the coalition agreement, and that includes a commitment to European reform, on which Conservative and Liberal Democrat ministers alike have been able to work very constructively together and get some good results for this country.
Right. I know you didn't want to discuss with the others, so I'm going to put that straight to Ming Campbell. How are you going to operate in the next 3 years when David Cameron appears to be questioning, and his ministers, questioning every single aspect of Europe?
Well, you could say the general election started here today. And everyone knows by the time the general election comes, then the two parties will be separate with separate manifestos.
But how can you present a united front in Europe in the next 3 years?
With great difficulty is the answer to your question. Because for the next 2 or 3 years, every piece of legislation, every speech, every decision made will be seen through the prism of the referendum. It's just like Scotland, where exactly the same thing has happened. Now, that creates a degree of uncertainty, which, for example, if you're considering making a large-scale investment in the United Kingdom, foreign investors will say there is too much uncertainty involved here. Now, we understand that Angela Merkel has said she's willing to do a deal.
This is a story in the Telegraph. She hints at a deal for Cameron, and the other
people. But what sort of deal? Well, and if it's not good enough, is David Cameron going to come back in due course and say, vote no in the referendum, because I have failed to achieve what I set out to achieve?
Ming Campbell, what do you think, and when you look back now at the last reshuffle, and you realise, of course, that there's not a single Liberal Democrat now in the Foreign Office, do you think this was the grand plan?
I don't think it was a grand plan. I mean, I've talked to Nick Clegg about this. He knows my view. It's not something I would have done for a whole variety of reasons. But that doesn't stop us having a clear view that what the Prime Minister has introduced today is wholly contrary to the interests of the country. It's more in the interests of the Conservative Party than the country. And if you like, it's more about UKIP than it is about UK.
Well, let's talk about UKIP for a minute, Nigel Farage. Do you think this means that there'll be a pact at the next election with Tories who have specifically said that they will vote out?
Do you know, watching the Prime Minister, watching William Hague, watching the Europe Minister, the more I see of them today, the less I trust them. This is a deliberate tactic to try and kick the can down the road for 5 years or more. What they've really launched today is a 5-year campaign to try and keep us in. I don't think there's any intention here to have a serious European debate. They actually want to try and close it down ahead of the next election, thinking we're going to go away. Do you know what? We're not. And I think the prospects of us doing a deal with David Cameron are very unlikely.
No deal with David Cameron. I'm asking whether you'll do a deal with Tories who say that they're going to vote for an out on the referendum.
Do you know, to be honest with you, that's not on my agenda at the moment. On my agenda are big county council elections this year, and we've all forgotten a European election in 2014.
Now, you said before this speech that there were going to be a great many calls. You were going to take all these calls from disgruntled Conservatives after the speech. Has your phone been ringing?
I think he's done enough to keep them on side.
So you've had no calls?
I think he's done enough.
Have you had any telephone calls? Has any Tory called you today?
I've answered that twice.
Okay,
he's done enough.
No.
He's done enough to keep the Tory Eurosceptics on his backbenches satisfied for the moment. But you know, within a few weeks, we'll be talking about Romanian and Bulgarian accession. This issue has not gone away.
We're definitely going to be coming to that later in the program. But Em Reynolds, first of all, you know, if David Cameron has been preparing for this speech for 6 months, Ed Miliband's known it's been coming for 6 months, and yet when he's doing that dispatch box, he didn't get it right, did he?
Well, look, for more than a year, we have had a very consistent position. I was in the same lobby as the Europe Minister, voting against an in-or-out referendum in October 2011. We're not the ones who changed our position on this. Ed Miliband said he didn't support an in-out referendum, and there wouldn't be an in-out referendum as far as Labour was concerned. And then Douglas Alexander had to temper that later. And then a spokesman had to say, well, actually, it's not that we're definitely against a referendum. Our position is consistent and clear. We have said we're not in favour of an in-out referendum, but you can never say never. You can never say never in foreign affairs. It could be that there's a situation in the future, but we will if there's a transfer of powers.
Let's just stick with that, because this is yet another position. What you are saying now is that never say never in politics. Again, Labour says there's no red lines then. So actually, what you're telling the viewers tonight is it is possible that Labour could go for an in-out referendum within the next 5 years. It is possible.
We are not planning to promise an in-out referendum at an arbitrary point in the future. And I think the question is, why 2017/2018? Because the last time we had treaty change in the European Union, it took a hell of a lot longer.
You could be the only party going to... I mean, we don't know the Liberal Democrats' position definitely on this yet.
They always do. Every election they promise a referendum and they all break it.
Okay,
never use game power, do they?
Hang on, Nigel. Do you rule out an in-out referendum?
Our position would be exactly the same as is in the coalition agreement. If there is any movement of powers from Westminster to Brussels, then we will put that to the people in a referendum. It's perfectly straightforward, perfectly clear, and it's what the Conservatives signed up to in 2010.
So actually, let's be quite clear then, Em Reynolds, you might be the only party that goes into the next election not promising a referendum of some sort on future European membership.
We have also said that we would not repeal that legislation, so there would be a referendum if there was a transfer of power from Westminster to Brussels. That's clear.
Nigel Farage, as somebody was saying today, that this is the most powerful day for a party that doesn't have an MP.
I think that's right. You know, I mean, I think we have changed the fundamental nature of the debate in this country. Withdrawing from the European Union is now a respectable debate. The trouble is that all these parties, all these three parties, will now coalesce around trying to keep us as part of the European Union single market, and we'll be the only people battling against.
David Lind, how do you take on what Nigel Farage says, that it's all a chimera, it's all nonsense, it's all you're actually not really serious about fundamental change, and actually can be bought off very quickly with a quick hit from Angela Merkel?
Yeah, quite right.
It's good to have early indications that important partners like Germany, like the Netherlands, like the Czech Republic want to get into a serious discussion, negotiation with the United Kingdom on the matters affecting the future of Europe. What I would say to Nigel is that I think it is a very important pledge that the Prime Minister's given to hold a decisive in-out referendum, because by saying trust the people, I think it will enable a very serious, mature debate to take place. As my Irish counterpart has said, their experience of referendums is that people then focus on the content of the issue.
We had a cast iron guarantee once before, didn't we?
We will win.
Cast iron guarantee.
I'm going to have
that was your leader.
Thank you very much indeed.